Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, the architect of a horrific genocide against the Palestinian people.
Mamdani and his wife actually were some of the early people to say that Israel was committing genocide within weeks of the October 7th attack. It was no matter what Israel did, they were going to say that. And even though Israel took such pains to avoid civilian casualties and was more successful in doing so than any other military in history, now it's taken for granted all over the place. Oh, the Israelis committed genocide in Gaza. It's been a concerted and skillfully executed propaganda campaign. Now, it was in this atmosphere that Mamdani was able to win because the left was so solidly anti-Israel. They were happy with a deeply anti-Israel candidate who even said he got into politics because he hated Israel. It's very clear that he is acting actually in full accord with both of his guiding philosophies, that is Marxism and 12er Shiite Islam. And his hostility to Israel is common to both of them, because the Marxists see Israel as a colonialist, racist, oppressor state, and the 12er Shiites see it as an illegal occupier of land that is rightfully the property of Muslims and Islam, and consequently the hostility of both is tremendous toward Israel. He has said himself, as I show in the book, that he actually decided to become a politician because of the Palestinian cause, or the jihad against Israel. And so it's no surprise in the slightest degree that as mayor, he would be following that and being hostile to Israel as much as he possibly can as mayor of New York, divesting from the Israeli bonds and all the rest of it. He has a tremendous, deeply rooted hostility to Israel. And that is based on both of his guiding ideologies, his Marxism and his 12er Shiite Islam. And his father, we should remember, Mahmoud Mamdani, who I discuss in the book, he is a very well-known Marxist theorist who has written about Israel from the standpoint of it being this illegal settler colonialist state, the whole Marxist view of Israel cast as the oppressor, and even justified suicide bombing on that basis. So Mamdani has said that what he's doing is implementing the political philosophy that he learned from his parents. So his father's Marxist view of Israel makes him deeply hostile to Israel. And then there is his 12er Shiite Islam, which makes him even more hostile to Israel, as the Quran says in chapter 5, verse 82, that the Jews are going to be, the believers in Islam will find that the Jews are the most vehement in hostility to the Muslims. And so on both sides, he doesn't just object to Israeli policy, but he has a deep animus toward the Jews coming from Islam, that the Jews are the worst enemies of the Muslims. The Jews are always plotting against Allah. They're scheming to kill the prophets, to impede the plans of the Muslims, and all these terrible charges that the Quran makes against Jews. And then on the other side, he's got the idea of the Jews as the oppressors and the colonialists who are stealing the Palestinians' land. So it all works together into something that is far larger, far deeper, far more encompassing than just, oh, I don't like Benjamin Netanyahu and the decisions of his government. Mamdani is not an isolated phenomenon. Mamdani is part of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. That's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That is other politicians around the country. The mayor of Seattle, Katie Wilson, I think her name is. There was a failed mayoral candidate in Minneapolis, Omar Fateh, who's very much like Mamdani, only lost because there was a split in the Somali community between one tribe that supported him and one that didn't, or otherwise he would have won. And there are others around the country. And once they're in power and they're working toward it, with very little pushback, they are going to implement the same kind of measures against Israel, against supporters of Israel, against Jews in general. And this is something I don't think anybody's aware of. But the situation in America could become extremely dire for Jews right now in the near future because of the left's hostility to Israel and its manifest, very clear, obvious willingness to victimize ordinary Jewish individuals in the United States because of that hostility to Israel. And this is only going to get worse. And Mamdani is just the leading figure of it. I think the apex of Mamdani's slippery dishonesty, that he is a very clever, intelligent individual who knows what kind of nonsense he can peddle in order to lull his enemies into complacency. And that's what he did with the whole globalize the Intifada controversy. Globalize the Intifada means attack innocent Jewish civilians everywhere in the world. That's the globalized part, is everywhere in the world. Intifada is violence against Jews. The intifadas, the first and second intifadas, where the word means shaking off or uprising. And so the Marxists love that. It's a revolution. It's shaking off the oppressor. And they were large-scale attacks on Israelis that resulted in the murders of numerous Israeli civilians. Civilians, not IDF, not cops, civilians, ordinary folks who just happened to be residents of Israel. This is what he wants to globalize. And when he was challenged about it, he says, well, I believe in the freedom of speech. And I think that it's terrible if you try to outlaw a phrase. Nobody's talking about outlawing it. This is how he's so slippery. And he doesn't believe in the freedom of speech for 1 second. If he had the power, if he knew there wouldn't be a challenge from the courts, he would criminalize dissent today. But in any case, that's what he said, that he doesn't want to outlaw people's ability to protest and so on. And that this is completely disingenuous, because Intifada is not a protest. It's violence. And it's not violence in a military sense, but against innocent people. And so to refuse to condemn it is obviously to signal to his allies and supporters, including the more unhinged ones, that he's okay with violence against Jews. And you watch, there will be violence against Jews in New York City, and then the perpetrators will not be punished to the full extent of the law, or in a manner comparable to the punishment given to anybody who may attack his own friends and supporters, which I certainly do not condone and am not calling for, but I think could happen because people are going to get increasingly angry with him as it becomes clearer what he's doing. And if that does happen, which I hope it does not, then he will come down very hard upon the people who attacked leftists or whoever. But if in the other side, when there is violence against Jews in New York, then we're going to see commuted sentences, suspended sentences, good behavior releases, all that. And Mamdani and his wife actually were some of the early people to say that Israel was committing genocide within weeks of the October 7th attack. It was no matter what Israel did, they were going to say that. And even though Israel took such pains to avoid civilian casualties and was more successful in doing so than any other military in history, now it's taken for granted all over the place. Oh, the Israelis committed genocide in Gaza. It's been a concerted and skillfully executed propaganda campaign. Now, it was in this atmosphere that Mamdani was able to win, because the left was so solidly anti-Israel. They were happy with a deeply anti-Israel candidate who even said he got into politics because he hated Israel. And so that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is 25 years of propaganda after 9/11. After 9/11, 6 days after 9/11, on September 17th, 2000, George W. Bush went into a mosque in Washington, D.C. with Nihad Awad of the Hamas-linked Council on American Islamic Relations and Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who was the president of the American Muslim Council, which was a leading Muslim organization in the country at that time. And now he's in prison for financing al-Qaeda. And George W. Bush stood with those guys and he said, Islam is peace, and don't bother Muslim women who are wearing hijab, and be nice to the Muslims, as if the Muslims are the victims of this attack. And he didn't dare speak honestly about the ideological foundations of the 9/11 attack, and neither did anybody else. And so for 25 years, New Yorkers and Americans in general were inundated on a daily basis practically with disinformation and misinformation saying Islam is peace. The 9/11 attacks had nothing to do with Islam. Islam is it's one of the great religions. It's peaceful and tolerant. We should welcome Muslims into our communities. We should not be suspicious of Islam. And everybody got the message, because the countervailing voices were silenced and demonized. And so 25 years after 9/11, New Yorkers had no hesitation voting for a Muslim because they know, yeah, Islam is peace. Islamophobia is the real problem. And so here's a young, handsome Muslim who echoes all of our leftist concerns. Great. We'll show how broad-minded and tolerant New Yorkers have always been.